we begin with yet another interesting domain of philosophy, and that is to do with Greek philosophy. Greek philosophy, as most of you understand, is one of the most influential intellectual traditions of human history. And we begin with this very pertinent paper in philosophy, which is introduced in almost all the universities of India and abroad, including our University of Delhi. This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor, Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. So the first thing first, Greek philosophy, as the very name suggests, is a part of Western philosophy, and it is rightly said that it shaped Western thought, science, politics, ethics. I mean, whatever we read in the Western concepts, the Western philosophy today, Greek philosophy has a huge role to play. In fact, many scholars claim that Greek philosophy can be broadly divided into two different periods, with the earliest thinkers who were called as pre-Socratics and the later thinkers as post-Socratics. So Socrates is the benchmark where Greek philosophy is divided into pre and post. The pre-Socratic philosophers are also called as the early Greek philosophers, and the post-Socratic philosophers are the later Greek philosophers. So our discussion today would largely be around the pre-Socratic thinkers or the early Greek philosophers, and we will also come up and see why they have been, there's also other synonym for them, and that is the Milesian thinkers. Now, who are the pre-Socratic philosophers then, or why is it called pre-Socratic philosophy? The term pre-Socratic refers to the Greek philosophers who lived and worked and studied and engaged intellectually before the time of Socrates, 469 to 399 BCE. And this categorization is used because Socrates marked a significant turning point in philosophical thought. It is interesting to know that pre-Socratics are focused on nature, physis, the cosmos, and the origin of things. Socrates shifted the focus to ethics, human nature, and knowledge. But clearly the pre-Socratics had laid the groundwork for later philosophical inquiry, influencing Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So let's get started with the timeline of pre-Socratic philosophers first. The pre-Socratic period spans roughly from 600 BCE to 400 BCE. Some major pre-Socratic philosophers and their approximate dates is Thales of Miletus, who is also known as the father of philosophy, the first known Greek philosopher. The timeline of Thales is 624 to 546 BCE. Anaximander, 610 to 546 BCE, who proposed the idea of apeiron, or the infinite. Anaximenes, 585 to 528 BCE, who believed that air was the fundamental element. Heraclitus, again, is yet another significant Greek philosopher, early Greek philosopher, and his timeline is somewhere between 535 to 475 BCE, where his very famous quotes have been something like, everything flows, everything is a flux, change is the essence of reality, and so on and so forth. We also have Parmenides, 515 to 450 BCE, who argued that change is an illusion. Reality is one unchanging being. Now, The timeline of pre-Socratic philosophers, further if we study, we see there are also other equally important philosophers like Empedocles, 494 to 434 BCE, who had introduced the theory of four elements: earth, water, air, and fire. We also have Anaxagoras, 500 to 428 BCE, who had introduced the concept of nous or mind as the cosmic order. In fact, our philosophy of mind owes a lot to Anaxagoras. We also have Pythagoras, 570 to 495 BCE, though majorly known for his mathematical and geometrical theories. But Pythagoras is an early Greek philosopher and famous for his number as Arche. We also have Leucippus and Democritus, 5th century BCE, and they are clearly the early atomic theorists. Now, I had just about mentioned that Thales is considered as the father of Greek philosophy, and this is so because he was the first to seek natural explanations for phenomena rather than mythological ones. He proposed that water is the fundamental principle of everything, and these term, the fundamental principle or arche, is something where the Greek philosophers had come up with. Thales of Miletus is also credited with founding the Milesian school, influencing later philosophers. Aristotle regarded Thales as the first philosopher because he moved beyond mythology and introduced rational inquiry. Now, let us quickly discuss some of the common features of early Greek philosophy. The pre-Socratic philosophers had certain common themes and concerns. First, arche. Arche is the search for the first principle. They sought the fundamental substance from which everything originates. So for Thales, arche was water, Anaximenes, air, Heraclitus, fire, Anaximander, something which comes up as indeterminate substance, Empedocles, four elements, Anaxagoras, nous, and so on and so forth. Cosmology and nature is yet the second common feature of the early Greek thinkers. Now, the early Greek philosophers tried to explain the origin, the structure, and functioning of the universe, and they said that, for example, Anaximander, that Apeiron was an early attempt to explain the boundless, limitless concept of universe. So, if we are to list down the features clearly, the first of it is the rational explanation over mythology. So we see that in the early Greek philosophers, instead of gods causing natural events, or the Old Testament or the New Testament talking about God's role, they shifted to look for a more rational, logical, and nuanced explanation for natural causes. Thales predicted a solar eclipse based on astronomy and not divine will. And this sets apart why they are the first philosophers, for they dared to think beyond the already set up mythological or very traditional outlook, and thus giving a rational and a more logical explanation to their interpretation. The second feature is the problem of change and permanence. Now we see that when they had set to study nature, they were introduced with two parallel concepts, and that is either nature is always changing, as that has been the view of philosophers like Heraclitus, who had quoted everything is in a flux, change is constant, and there are also philosophers like Parmenides, who talks about the problem of permanence. So for Parmenides, change is an illusion. Being is eternal and unchanging. And this debate, the problem of change and permanence vis-a-vis nature, influenced later philosophers like Plato. We also see that mathematics and abstract thoughts becomes a unique feature in our early Greek philosophy. For instance, Pythagoras believed numbers explained the universe. And his theorem, the Pythagoras theorem, which we all know, is still very much fundamental in our geometry today. Going ahead, we also see that there is a concept of pluralism versus monism. For instance, many of the early Greek philosophers are called as monists. Monists because they believed in the existence of one fundamental substance. That is, Thales believed that it is water, which is the arche. Anaximenes believed that it is air, and Anaximander believed that it is an indeterminate substance. Anaxagoras believed that it is nous. Parmenides believed that it is being, and so on and so forth. So we see that monism, unlike pluralism, which we encounter when we do Empedocles, they are usually monists. The other feature is clearly they being materialists. Now, what is materialists? Material or matter is that which subsists by itself. So the early Greek philosophers were very much clear that whichever is the ultimate principle, and which they had coined as the term arche, has to be something which is self-sufficient, which subsists by itself. And that which subsists by itself has to be perceived or has to be known through the five sense organs. And thus, whether it is water or fire or air, they have been largely materialists. Now, when we go ahead, we also see that they are also credited as being the raw scientists. For they were the first early Greek philosophers, or rather the philosophers per se, who dared to question. Question whom? Question the authority, question the churches, question the holy books, question the Old Testament, the New Testament, and question. For please understand, the role of a philosopher is to question. And our questioning spirit continues with our discussions. And the day our discussion stops, our laboratory in philosophy stops. For in philosophy, we do not have a laboratory per se with labs and fieldwork and chemicals, but our internal chemicals, our brain work, our discussions are enough and more to make a laboratory kicking and alive. Then when we go ahead, we also see that the early Greek philosophers were very persistent in discovering the arche. Arche was their be-all and end-all. So they said that everything that is around us has to be sourced from one ultimate source. So that ultimate source, or that be-all and end-all, is what they claimed as arche. And arche connotes different material items for different naturalists. And this brings us to yet another feature of the early Greek philosophers, which is they are naturalists. Naturalists because they are the philosophers, the thinkers who questioned nature. For them, nature was their laboratory, nature was their experimentation on which their critical analysis, their questioning spirit was engaged in. So they found that there are various elements of nature, the elements like air, water, fire, and they made one of those as arche. We also see further when we discuss the early Greek philosophers that apeiron was yet another very much discussed concept in Greek philosophy. Now, what is the basic difference between arche and epeiron? So, when we discuss Anaximenes in our henceforth lectures, we would be discussing epeiron in detail. But quickly, if arche is the ultimate source, the summum bonum, epeiron, on the other hand, is also the ultimate source, the summum bonum, but it is limitless, it is boundless. So, if it is limitless, it is just not tied to the materialistic string, it goes beyond matter. Unlike arche, which is also the source, the summum bonum, however, arche is easily a naturalistic material element. So, epeiron is more abstract in that notion. Arche, on the other hand, is more empirical. Thus, yet the other feature of the early Greek philosophers is they being largely empiricists. Why empiricists? Now, we know that John Locke was or is the father of empiricism and René Descartes the father of rationalism. However, John Locke was influenced by the early Greek thinkers, and he owes it to the early Greek philosophers for stating that to know something, to have a proof of something or to disprove something, that something has to be tested empirically, or that has to be tested materially. So, anything which passes through the litmus test of knowledge per se, they are knowledgeable only when they are empirical. So, this makes the early Greek philosophers, most of them materialists, and thus empiricists, though rationalists is also yet another key feature when we discuss philosophers like Anaximenes, Anaximander, for we see that the concepts of epeiron, such as indeterminate substance in Anaximander or nous in Anaxagoras, they cannot really be just cannot just have had an ostensive definition where we pinpoint and show and say that, well, this is what, the limitless, the boundless being looks like. So, for that, it is the reasoning, the mind that makes an entry. However, majorly, the common feature of the early Greek philosophers is what is their empiricists' outlook. Now, that we have more or less discussed the common features of early Greek philosophers, it is interesting also to note that the pre-Socratic philosophers had laid the foundations for logic, for science and mathematics, and also metaphysics. And the reason why most of them are called also as raw scientists. So, being a raw scientist is one of their yet another common feature of EGP or early Greek philosophers. Now, what then is this arche that constitutes everything in the universe? We would be studying about arche a lot when we are discussing early Greek philosophers, and as now when we are doing the conceptual clarity, it is pertinent that we are extremely clear about the concepts that we are dealing with. Now, the early Greek philosophers had sought a single underlying substance or principle from which all things originate and remain sustained and eventually returned. And this idea of a first principle is called as arche in Greek philosophy. So, we see that the Greek word arche means beginning, origin, or principle. In philosophy, thus it refers to the fundamental substance or principle that underlies and governs all the existence. So, does this mean that arche has certain characteristics? Yes, it does. First, the primary source. It is the origin of all things. Second, unifying principle. It explains the diversity of nature by reducing it to a single cause. Third, eternal and unchanging, which means that though things change, the arche remains constant. Fourth, foundation of reality, which is everything is derived from the arche and ultimately returns to it. So quickly to recap, the features of arche are first, the primary source, second, unifying principle, third, eternal and unchanging, and fourth, foundation of reality. Now, if we just again go back to what we have been discussing, we see that in the PPT displayed here, the different pre-Socratic philosophers had proposed different substances as the arche. Philosopher Thales, we see he had proposed water as the arche, and the explanation that he had given was everything originates from water. It is essential for life and undergoes transformation. That is, water is the only element that can metamorphose into all the three states of solid, liquid and gaseous. And so Thales had rightly thought that water has to be the be all and end all, and water is rightly the arche. Anaximenes, on the other hand, talks about air as the proposed arche. And the explanation he gives is that air is infinite and can transform into different states as well. We also see Heraclitus, who talks about fire as the proposed arche, and Heraclitus talks about the universe is in constant change like fire, and change itself is the fundamental reality. Empedocles, on the other hand, talks about the four elements: earth, water, air and fire, and the explanation he gives is instead of one arche, all things are composed of four elements mixed by love and strife. Anaxagoras further had proposed nous or mind as the arche, where the explanation has been that a cosmic intelligence or nous, which is a universal intelligence, organizes everything in the universe. Leucippus and Democritus, the atomist schools, on the other hand, proposed atoms as the arche, and the explanation that they had given was everything is composed of tiny, indivisible particles. So we see that various philosophers had given various thought process to the element of arche, and thus whenever we are discussing the early Greek philosophers, arche is the first concept that we all have to be really clear about. Now that we have discussed about arche, in our next class we will be discussing about yet the other extremely important concept in Greek philosophy, apeiron. Thank you.